Hello, everybody. This is Todd Dewey from the hit show Ice Road Truckers on the History Channel. And my source of radio and all truckers news, I go to tncradio.live.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Train Station on tncradio.live. I'm Bill Waldrop, your host, along with my co-host, Jim Leaders, and our guest this week is a guy that I got a chance to work with on the UP Steam program. He's quite an interesting person and has a long railroad history. Hello to Jack Wheelihan. How are you, sir?
Great. Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure, and I'm very glad that you are here with us today. Well, we want to kind of start out with you like we did some of our other previous guests and talk about, your young life. Where were you born and raised? How did you get the bug for railroads? Did you have family members that worked in railroading and you kind of automatically got into it? Or kind of tell us your young life story.
Well, I was born in New Jersey in 1942. My birthday is April 26th. I was born in East Orange, New Jersey, but by the time I was 1 year old, they moved to Cranford, New Jersey. And my dad worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad, and his dad, who I never met, my grandfather, worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad as a conductor. And reportedly, people in the family tell me he had 50 years with the Pennsylvania Railroad. So that would have been in the late 1800s. During the war, my dad then left the Pennsylvania Railroad and went to work for Elizabethtown Gas Company. He used to take me down to the yard. I can remember at 2 or 3 years old in the 1940 Ford, and by the yard office and watch the big 080 switch the yard. And one of the earliest things that I can remember as a real little guy, 2 or 3 years old, we were there in the yard, which was on the south side of the Jersey Central main line there in Cranford. Pretty good sized yard, 4-track main line. And westbound went the famous Reading Crusader with that streamlined Pacific with the stainless steel train that had an observation car at each end, one of the few things I remember. So they never had to turn the train around. And he must have been doing 90 or 100 miles an hour, and boy, I was really impressed with that. The steam locomotive and the railroading bug bit me very, very early on. And as I grew up and was able to ride a bicycle, in the early 50s, I was able to, ride the bike down to the roundhouse they had there, commuter steam engine roundhouse there in Cranford. Cranford station was a high-level station with high-level platforms, and you could ride my bicycle down there. I can remember going into the roundhouse, and the old-timers would, tolerate you, and I didn't have a camera, so my dad passed away in 1947, at the age of 5 years old, that I can remember him, but I wasn't really aware of what was going on at the time.
Right.
Some years after that, mid-50s, I think, my mother and I moved to Chatham, New Jersey, and that was on the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western, on the electrified line. And as I got more and more experienced, and even before a driver's license, I befriended a lot of the engineers and conductors and stuff on the Lackawanna commute service, the electrification. And then I got into towers. And I was really gearing myself, planning to go to work for the Lackawanna Railroad. I befriended the road foreman of engines down in Hoboken a couple of times and put in an application to be a hostler helper, anything. My mother could see what direction this was going. He was dead set against me going to work for a railroad.
Really?
She wanted me to go to college and get a good job.
Right. And so you did. I see you went to Oklahoma State University.
Yes. Yeah. Went. She found 3 colleges in the country that offered a degree, a 2-year associate's degree in diesel technology. One was Alfred University in upstate New York, and my high school grades weren't high enough to get in there. The other was Texas A&M and Oklahoma A&M. In those days, it was before it was Oklahoma State. in the mid-'50s. So she was planning all this and everything, and luckily the acceptance from my application for Texas A&M got delayed or lost in the mail, who knows what. But I was accepted at Oklahoma State and started there in 1960.
And that's a whole different world than New Jersey.
Yeah.
It's always windy in Oklahoma. Lovely state, but always windy.
And not only that, I think the first month I was there, a tornado.
Well, of course. That's all. Of course. Yeah. Sure.
And somehow or another, I wound up in the dorm with the Oklahoma State football players. And I was the Yankee from out of town in the one room down the hall. I was fascinated by the tornado, and everybody's running for cover, and I wanted to go out and watch.
How did you get? So your mom got you into diesel technology. Did she push you into that, or did you just show an interest in diesels, and that's why you kind of went along that line?
Yeah, that pretty much covers it. As though I was, I had enough knowledge and experience at 16 years old, trying to learn about steam locomotives on the New York and Long Branch at the Pennsylvania Railroad there in South Amboy, New Jersey. They were still running K4s on the commuter trains down there. Yeah. But I knew enough that I could see that, the Lackawanna was all diesel, and very few railroads in the country had any steam engines left. The IC and the Union Pacific running anything in the late 50s. So I really began to take an interest in the diesel locomotives, and so she found me 3 universities that offered a degree in diesel technology. At that age, somebody says diesels to me, I don't think trucks. I think railroad locomotives.
Of course.
Right.
Yep. I grew up on the Katy and the Southern Pacific here in the Houston area, and I never saw any steam. In fact, the story I had on a previous show is the first steam engine I ever saw in operation was the Reeder Railroad in Arkansas. And that was my first experience with that. Of course, I was hooked at that point because I'd never heard a whistle or seen one operate till then. And that was early 70s. I was in junior high school and went with a group of friends from our railroad club here. So that was my first experience. And of course, it has stuck with me since.
Yeah, I can't remember when I saw my first diesel. Probably, I don't remember seeing any on the Jersey Central because it was all steam there in Cranford. Great big Wooten Firebox Pacifics and the Camelbacks.
So were you the typical young rail fan where you rode your bike down, you hung out in the roundhouse? Did they put you on the engines and let you ride with them? Did you have a camera? And when did you get your first camera and start taking pictures, if you even did?
I didn't until I went to work for Electromotive. I didn't get my first 35 millimeter camera until the winter of 1962.
Wow. Okay. So you got out of high school and you went to Oklahoma State University for diesel technology. Well, I'd have to say, my friend, that worked out well for you.
Yes, it definitely did. And
yes,
at the second year, when you were just about finishing up, which would be the spring of 1962, or late 1961, that part of the college there, they would post for job interviews.
Right.
And I went to an interview for the Frisco Railroad, and it was pretty well gearing to that, to be a trainee, in the mechanical department for the St. Louis San Francisco Railroad, the Frisco, out of Springfield, Missouri. And then I saw one day they posted applications for an interview for my roommate. He wanted to go to work for Halliburton, the big oil well company, and there was one for General Motors. So, me, one-track mind. Somebody says General Motors, whoop, I think Electromotive Division.
Of course.
Right.
So I get the application. It's a 4-page application. I spent 2 days filling the thing out and everything, and then submitted it to the head of our department there. So some days later, I get notified to appear such and such a room and for my interview with the man from General Motors. Okay, fine. So,
did he come down to Oklahoma, or did you have to go to Chicago?
No, they went. This was a recruiter out of GM, believe it or not, and he came there to Stillwater, Oklahoma, to Oklahoma State. He was probably there for a couple of days interviewing all kinds of candidates in the engineering department and our mechanical tech department. So I went to the interview, and it didn't take me long to figure out that this guy was from General Motors. He was out of Detroit. So I said, gee, I don't mean to waste your time, sir, but I don't really want to go to work for General Motors. My interest is the railroad locomotive division, electromotive division out of LaGrange, Illinois. And that would be what I would be interested in. He says, oh, okay, fine. Thanks for being honest. And I'll forward your application on. Have a nice day. So that's the end of that. Months later, I get a letter from the personnel department of electromotive division wanting me to come to LaGrange for a job interview and a tour of the plant.
Wow.
Providing an airline ticket and everything. Well, I'd never been on an airplane before, so hey, what the heck?
Why not?
So, make a long story short, I show up at the personnel department, and they want to know, what job I'm applying for, and I'm cooling my heels down there, sitting in a chair with a whole bunch of other young guys. Finally, the secretary says, well, we don't seem to see your name on the list here. What job are you applying for? And I said, ma'am, I have no idea. And I handed her the letter they sent me. She says, oh, you're the guy they're all looking for.
Really? Wow.
And I said, oh, now what? Did I get here late or something? So she goes into the office, and the guy in charge, his name was Shorty Edwards, one of those names you'll never forget. And boy, he was really short, too.
Yeah.
Comes out and he says, are you Wheelihan? Yeah, yes, sir. He says, come with me. Up the stairs we go, all the way to the third floor to the service department. And he takes me into this office to the guy in charge of what was called in those days the field instructor department. And there was about 40 or 50 guys that delivered new locomotives worldwide, drill rigs and power generating, and you name it. And his name was Jim Moran. So he said, this is the guy you've been looking for. Okay, so we introduced, talked back and forth and everything, about 15 minutes with him, and he says, okay, let me take you down the hall and have you meet the assistant general service manager, and he'll talk to you for a while. Okay, well, talk about old home week. The guy was Willard A. Gardner, commonly called Bill Gardner.
I think I've heard that name.
Yeah, oh yeah. Pretty famous model railroader, served as apprenticeship at Altoona. On the Pennsylvania Railroad, was a live steam. He built 3 live steam 1-inch scale models, massive HO railroad in his basement, and Model Railroader magazine had him classified as a master modeler. And we started to talk steam. Well, one thing leads to another. I must have spent an hour with Bill Gardner. He later became my mentor because all we talked about was steam. And he got a phone call and says, oh, they're looking for me down in personnel. I have to get back to the airport to fly back to Oklahoma. So down the hall I go, back to Mr. Oran's office, and he said, okay, so it appears to be all settled. You'll start June 1st, $510 a month, and a full expense account. It's a full-time traveling job. And, of course, nobody had ever yet told me what the job was.
Oh, man.
But I thought fast, and I said, $510 a month and a full expense account to deliver new locomotives for the great and powerful electromotive in LaGrange? Hoo-ha, put me in, coach, I'm fresh.
Yeah.
So then that's the way it stood. So months go by, and my mom came down to Stillwater, Oklahoma, and picked up my stuff and dropped me off at LaGrange, Illinois. I stayed at the hotel in downtown LaGrange. And she went on to New Jersey, and I started with EMD at June 1st, 1962, as a field instructor delivering new locomotives. The first job was, they send you to the Service Department Training Center for a couple of weeks, and then I went to Roanoke, Virginia on GP30 delivery for Norfolk and Western Railroad.
Let's pause right there, guys. That's our first segment. Thank you so much. And you are listening to this train station. I am Bill Waldrop with co-host Jim Leaders, and our guest this week is Jack Wheelihan talking about his life of railroading. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Don't miss Marcia Campbell, North America's trucking sweetheart, Thursdays at 6 p.m. Central on TNCRadio.live.
As a professional driver, the engineers at Front Lane know that you remain focused on the road regardless of weather and traffic conditions. That's not always true of the drivers behind you. Every 9 minutes, another commercial vehicle is rear-ended by a driver failing to control their speed. And guess who gets the blame? When you have to brake quickly, Tailbone illuminates a series of bright LED lights that allow the driver behind you to react up to 50% faster. Using amazing accelerometer technology and a battery that will last for years, Tailbone meets the standards set by the NHTSA and the FMCSA. Learn more by visiting www.frontlane.com/tailbone. That's www.frontlane.com/tailbone. Approved in all 50 states, it's Tailbone by Front Lane.
Hey, rideshare drivers and gig economy workers, the host of TNCRadio.live, the Rideshare Rodeo Podcast, and the Gig Economy Podcast come together for news, talk, music, stories, laughs, and more. We're live Fridays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, right here on TNCRadio.live.
Welcome back to the train station on TNCRadio.live. I'm Bill Waldrop with Jim Leaders. Hey, our email address, if you have any questions or comments or ideas for the train station show, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is houstonrailfans@gmail.com. So drop us a line. Again, we'd like to hear from you. Our guest this week is Jack Wheelihan. We're talking about his experience hiring out with EMD, from the General Motors division of EMD. And Jack, you started there in 1962, and then shortly thereafter, before your continued promotion, you got drafted into the Army in 64 and ended up back in Texas.
Yes. Yeah, it's funny, too, because I knew something was about to happen. And in those days, 1963, 1964, Electromotive was not making any effort to get military deferments for young college employees. So I got this notification, let's see, where was I? Omaha, delivering GP35s and DD35s to the UP to take my physical. Oh. Well, I'm from New Jersey, so the draft board was in Morristown, New Jersey, and we worked out a deal with the Selective Service organization that, take your physical there in Omaha, Nebraska. We don't want to drive all the way across the country just to take a physical in New Jersey, right, and then go back to work in Omaha, Nebraska. So I took my physical there, and my next job assignment, late summer 1964, was delivering narrow gauge diesel locomotives to the National Railways of Mexico narrow gauge line eastward out of Puebla, Mexico.
Now, Jack, let me ask you real quick. I see you went to Mexico and delivered all these engines. Did you travel with the engines, or they were just put in, to the railroads and moved down there, and you got to the destination to make sure they arrived? How did that exactly work?
Well, it was a double delivery. Me and another fellow, the lead man, I guess it was referred to. There was an order for GP35s and these narrow gauge units. Well, the narrow gauge units would come on a flat car. They were called GA8s. And there was a General Motors strike at the time. So my narrow gauge units got delayed. So I just assisted the lead man with the GP35 delivery. We put them in service, and they come across the bridge in Laredo, Texas. We put them in service in Nuevo Laredo, Mexico. And then they were assigned to the big facility there in Mexico City. I bought a couple of rolls of John F. Kennedy $50. Came out in 1964. Yeah, because the Mexican people worshipped John F. Kennedy.
Really?
He was Catholic.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Right.
And whenever I found a guy that would, really doing a good job for me or so like that, a good interpreter, I would give them one of these $50, and they would take it home and put it up on their mantle along with the rest of their religious medals.
I'll bet.
Wow.
I'll bet.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
That's awesome.
I really won a lot of special treatment and fans doing stuff like that.
So the narrow gauge engines finally got down there, huh? On the freight train. Yeah. How many months were you down there on that narrow gauge project?
I was there probably 2 months.
Wow.
And my draft notice came in the weekly mail pouch from LaGrange.
Wow. Well,
greetings.
Greetings. We're here to help you.
Now, how much were those engines? What was the price of those engines in those days?
Back in those days, I know when to jump forward a little bit, when I got when they promoted me to sales engineering in 1971 back at the plant, Hamburger was about the same price per pound as a GP40, GP40-2.
Well, that's an interesting comparison.
So, yeah, I mean, $240,000 for a GP40. And, they weighed 230, 240,000 pounds.
And so you stayed with EMD and you retired in 1998.
Right.
That's a long stretch. That's what, 36 years.
Yeah, 36 and a half years. Yeah.
Wow.
And the funny thing about it, the last probably 5 or 6 years that I was there, GM was going through quite a corporate reduction thing. Well, and they would offer early retirement packages for anybody 53 years old, 52 years old, some of these things, and they would give you the bridge to Social Security. So if you took the early retirement package, they would pay you the equivalent of Social Security till you became 62, and then you apply for your Social Security. Well, EMD had to be involved in that because if it was a corporate-wide thing for General Motors, through the personnel policies, even though EMD didn't need these reductions, why, there were guys going down to personnel and taking this 52-year-old, 53-year-old retirement. Well, that started to be quite a problem. So certain departments in EMD, certain engineering departments, and in the central service department that I was part of, they started to classify people with critical job skills. There were 5 of us. I was one of 5 in the central service department that was classified as critical job skills. So personnel was not allowed to talk to you or even offer you an early retirement. You had to work till 65 years old. Okay, whatever.
Yeah.
And every time they'd come up with one of these packages, and since I was back out in the field again, my field engineering department, with changes in policy and practices and some force reductions, I wound up with 6 guys. And we weren't doing export stuff at all anymore. So I went to the general service manager. I said, "Boss, this is ridiculous. I'm wasting my time here. Put me back out in the field." So a couple of months went by, and they come up with this. They'd be a senior district engineer, and I covered the east end of the Burlington Northern Railroad. Specifically, they were having a lot of problems with coverage for the West Burlington shops. So about 89 or 90, I went back out in the field. So anyway, one of the 5 of us would go down to personnel department when they'd hear about one of these retirement packages, and, "Oh, okay, what's your name?" And, they look on the list, "Woohoo, Pox, get out of here. We're not allowed to talk to you."
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was that, because part of the deal was with these early retirement packages, the department that allowed the person to retire had to take it as a headcount reduction.
But you didn't want to retire anyway, did you?
Well,
or did
not
you?
really. No,
yeah.
No.
You were having too much fun.
Yeah. Well, yeah, especially because they're in the late 90s, the Burlington Northern was getting all those SD70 Max. And to digress slightly, people have asked me over the years, with almost 37 years you worked for a locomotive, what's your favorite locomotive? What about it made it your favorite locomotive? Well, as much as I liked the SD45-2 and never having worked on a DDA 40X.
Right.
My favorite locomotive is an SD70 Mac.
Right.
And they look at you and say, what? All that computer stuff? Well, yeah, I couldn't handle the computer electronic air brake, but I gradually learned how to troubleshoot the electrical part of the locomotive. But an SD70 Mac with its AC traction will do things that defy the laws of physics that a locomotive engineer has been taught all his career. Never do this with a locomotive because you'll burn the traction motors out. You can't stall it. There's no short time ratings if it gets down on a grade too slow. You can sit there at 1 mile an hour and it won't slip and it won't overheat unless it's a real hot day. And, they're phenomenal locomotives. I'm the only guy in electromotive, probably the only guy in General Motors Corporation that had an engineer's ticket because of my activities with steam.
And we're going to get to that next. We're going to go into the steam era operations with you on our next segment. This is the train station on tncradio.live. I'm Bill Waldrop with Jim Leaders, and our guest this week is Jack Wheelihan. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
For the latest in Houston traffic, weather, news, and information, don't miss the Evening Surge on tncradio.live.
At Hot Shot Secret, we share the science behind common diesel problems and their solutions. For example,
diesel particulate filter regeneration.
The DPF catches particulates left over from combustion. The DPF regeneration cycle cleans the filter with temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. A computer sensor triggers the DPF regen, which is often accompanied by a loss of power and fuel economy. The frequency of DPF regens are in correlation to the cleanliness of the fuel burn. Under heavy operation with the dirty burn, DPF regens can occur multiple times per day. Hot Shot Secret Diesel Extreme Fuel Additive promotes a more complete combustion, creating fewer emissions and therefore fewer DPF regens. Vehicles using Diesel Extreme experience 83% less DPF regens.
Hot Shot Secret Diesel Extreme is available nationwide at truck stops, Fine Farm and auto stores, and online at hotshotsecret.com. Hot Shot Secret, powered by science.
I'm Shelley Johnson with Kathy Tuccaro. You can hear us Tuesdays on tncradio.live at 8 p.m. Eastern on Women Road Warriors. And don't miss Steve Summers' Overnight Drive right here on tncradio.live, weeknights midnight to 5 a.m. Eastern. Brought to you by Hot Shot Secret.
Welcome back to the train station on tncradio.live. We appreciate you tuning in. I'm Bill Waldrop along with Jim Leaders, and our guest this week is Jack Wheelihan. We talked about his early life and his career with EMD and the locomotives. Now, Jack, let's kind of move into the steam engine operations. Obviously, you ran them when you were younger and very fascinated by them, but it shows here that during the fall of '62, you were working on the new units out there on the N&W Railway. Then in Chattanooga, you kind of worked on some small little, what do you call them, local little short line railroads that were still running steam. And is that where you got your proficiency in the steam engines?
Right. Yeah, that's where, and as it worked out, the GP30s were transferred on the N&W in probably July, August of '62. Once they got broken in and everything, they assigned them all to Portsmouth, Ohio for coal service, and they would run between Williamson, West Virginia, and Portsmouth, Ohio. Well, the shop at Portsmouth, Ohio, wanted coverage Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. They didn't care about the middle of the week because the way the schedules worked out, all the units were coming back. So I said, gee, okay, so you don't care if I'm not here on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday? No, not really. Why? What do you got planned? I said, well, there's this little railroad over here in West Virginia. It's about an hour and a half, 2-hour drive from Portsmouth, Ohio to Dundon, West Virginia. It's called the Buffalo Creek and Gauley Railroad. And one of the foremen there at the shop said, oh, yeah, I've heard of that. They still run steam locomotives. I said, yep.
Yes, they do.
They sure do. 18 miles upgrade. They had 3 280s. One was called slobber face. They only bought one steam engine new. That was number 4. It was not superheated. So that was only worked in the better months. The other one was number 14 and number 13. I think they were former B&O 280s or C&O 280. But it was 18 miles from the B&O interchange at Dundon up to the coal mine at Wyden. They would take anywhere from 50 to 65 empty hoppers upgrade. You worked your butt off.
I mean, all 3 at one time?
No.
Okay.
They would alternate. Every month was a different engine.
Okay, got you.
And because the other month would get its monthly boiler wash and everything else, so they always had one ready to go at the first of every month. And I wound up going over there in the fall, and it was kind of strange because they were used to a lot of photographers by that stage of the game in the early 60s. And I show up in a Pontiac, red Pontiac, let's see, that was the Ventura, I think I had at the time, 1962 Pontiac, with New Jersey license plates.
Oh, boy.
Being from New Jersey, I had to title and license everything there. My paychecks went to my mom at home at the bank, and she took care of my finances, and I lived on the expense account because I was out of the office all the time. So, and, by that time, all I had was a 35 millimeter camera, but later on I got into a 4x5. And I went over and started, snooping around and met the guys and everything. Wanted to know why I was there. Well, pretty soon the superintendent, Dick Manning, came by, and they introduced me to him. And the hostler was the guy pretty much in charge there during the days. And told him I was with Electromotive, and I'm delivering the new diesels to the N&W at Portsmouth, Ohio. Oh. Why are you interested in steam engines? Long story. Once the bug bites you, 1945, 1946, you can't get it out of your system. Diesels are my business, but steam locomotives are my hobby. Oh, so you're willing to work, not just take pictures? Sure. Well, one thing led to another, and as I got more proficient, finally Manning said to me, he says, "Well, you wanna do a full trip up and back?" Sure. So, okay, that was it. Huh. So the train usually picked up the empties at the B&O interchange about noon, 1 o'clock. Took water halfway up at Swandale, where the big Georgia Pacific lumber mill was. Well photographed and everything. And then the grade gets steeper as you get up to Wyden. You have to collect all the loads and push the empties up a real steep feeder track that they would gravity feed the empties down, and collect all the whatever loads they had, 45 to 65, whatever, and downhill you came. So it was really easy coming downhill. All you had to do was make sure the air pumps worked okay. I fired up back, and we got back 8 or 9 o'clock at night, put the engine to bed, and by the time I got to Dick Manning's house, where he was letting me sleep in the back bedroom, I was asleep before the bulb went dark. I was tired.
I bet. That's a lot of work.
Well, they're hand fired.
Yeah.
So the next morning, I'm back down there, and Bob Carruthers, the hostler, says, "Well, how did it go?" I said, "Oh, man." He says, "Okay." Well, the engineer's name was Job Young. He was an older fella, and the fireman was a big, tall, slender guy called Ab Wilson, A.B. I did the whole thing. Ab just had a great time just riding the seat. And Bob asked me how the trip went. I said, "Oh, yeah, it was just really great." He gets around to it. How'd the engine sound? Whoa! It was fantastic. It was really loud. He said, "No. How did it sound?" He said, "Was it really, really loud? And how were you able to keep up steam?" I said, "Oh, well, there was a couple of times that I was really having trouble." He said, "Well, how much time did you get to rest?" I said, "Oh, none. Oh, I shoveled, and the horseshoe pattern and the firebox and everything. Oh, I would go 15, 20, 30 minutes at a crack and unable to stop. And then gradually I'd catch up with the steam again, and it wouldn't be dropping anymore. And then I could rest every couple of 2 or 3 minutes." He said, "Really? And how did the engine sound again?" I said, "Oh, it was really nice and loud." He says, "All right, let me explain to you what was going on." He said, "The engineer Job Young is playing with you. The engine's really, really, really loud, and it doesn't have that nice, crisp, sharp crack to it. He's got the power reverse a little bit too far down to the corner, which uses much more steam, which means you got to run the injectors much harder, which means you can't stop shoveling coal. Oh. So he said, when you go out the next time, which was going to be the following week, he handed me a piece of soapstone from the welder. He said, now, when the engine's sounding really good, nice and sharp and crisp and crack, and you're able to do your horseshoe pattern with the shovel and stop and then do it again and watch for the bright spots in the firebox, and everything is running nice and smooth, reach over Job's knee and put a white mark on where he's got the power reverse stick on the gear.
Aha.
Okay, so sure enough, that's what I did. And he saw me do that, and he just looked at me, his pipe stuck in his teeth. Didn't smile, didn't do anything at all. Just, So we're going along, and I'm shoveling, and I'm resting, and pretty soon I realize I'm shoveling more, and no rest period, and then I remembered what Bobby told me. He says, pay attention to the sound of the exhaust. So I stopped, and I went to the engineer's side, and I listened, and I then looked at the power reverse, and he's about 6 notches forward to where the white mark is. He's going through coal and water like crazy. So I reached over, and I tapped him on the knee, and I pointed to the mark, and he reached up, and he hooked her back up again, and he got a big grin on his face, took the pipe out of his teeth, and he said, "You're learning, kid."
Yeah.
Wow, literally feet to the fire. That's wow.
Yeah.
Learning the hard way. Well, that's awesome. Well, guys, let's take another break here real quick, and we'll go to our final segment. And we're going to talk about how you got involved with the Freedom Train and running the 4449 and eventually the UP Steam Crew. Our guest today is Jack Wheelihan. I am Bill Walter with Gym Leaders, and you are inside the train station on TNCRadio.live. We'll be right back.
This is Alec Debogorski. Catch our new show, Taillights, Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. Central on TNCRadio.live.
Kathy DeCaro is nothing short of amazing. She not only drives the world's biggest truck as a heavy equipment operator in northern Alberta, Canada. She's an international motivational speaker and the author of Dream Big, an autobiography about overcoming a lifetime of trauma and abuse that led to dreams of success. Kathy inspires people the world over to change their lives and improve their self-worth. Her book will change your life. She's passionate about personal growth and believes anyone can change their circumstances and overcome their obstacles if they believe in themselves. Her life will amaze you and seriously inspire you. Be sure to order a copy of her book, Dream Big, on Amazon.com.
Join Shelley Johnson and Kathy Tuccaro every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Time for Women Road Warriors on your driver navigation station, TNCRadio.live.
Welcome back to the train station on TNCRadio.live. I am Bill Waltrip along with Gym Leaders, and our guest this week is Jack Wheelihan. And Jack, we want to move now in this final segment to your STEAM years, mostly regarding the American Freedom Train, which apparently kind of got cranked up in 1974 when General Motors became a sponsor of the American Freedom Train. And turns out, you were the only steam locomotive engineer with General Motors that knew anything about it. So they put you on that team. Oh, darn. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was, by then I was been made a supervisor in the Central Service Organization. I was in charge of the field engineering group, and the assistant general service manager for Power Products by that time was Bill Gardner, the guy I told you about earlier. He and I were close friends. we were good friends outside of the company, joked back and forth. Sometimes when the boss wanted to get out of his office and away from the humdrum, he'd come down to my office and we'd shoot the bull, And he was former Navy and World War II experienced submarines. Anyway, I get secretary calls me on the phone, says, Bill Becker was the general service manager. Can you come down to Mr. Becker's office? Sure, immediately. I walk in the door, and here's Bill Gardner, the Power Products Assistant General Service Manager, sitting in one chair. Becker's behind the desk, and he says, shut the door. I said, uh-oh, what did I do wrong now?
Yeah.
Uh-oh,
here we go. So he says, have a seat. And he looks across his big desk at me, and he says, well, you finally found something that you can do. To talk about a left-handed compliment.
Right.
So he waits for that, to sink in, and what do you say for an opening like that? Well, let's give it a shot. What do you have in mind, boss? He says, I'm sure you're aware of what's going on with a big steam engine out in Portland, Oregon, that has been restored for the American Freedom Train. I said, oh, yeah, you mean the Southern Pacific Daylight, 4449. And Gardner turns to him and he says, I told you he'd know.
Of course.
It was en route to Chicago. And clearer heads had prevailed at the American Freedom Train, and the EMD was heavily involved in supporting the Freedom Train from the engineering department for power generating cars and foundation brakes and air systems and anything the American Freedom Train needed. The word rolled down from Detroit to Electromotive there in LaGrange that you do whatever they need, above and beyond the board. Yes,
right.
Sir. And there was a vice president assigned to that, J.J. McDonald. They realized that, okay, it's on its way on the Burlington Northern into Chicago. It'll be here in a couple of days. What are they going to do with it? Because the Freedom Train has not progressed to Chicago yet. It was being powered by Ross Rowland's former Reading T1, number 1. And it was going to be a month before it got to Chicago so they could change locomotives. What do you do with it? Well, if you put it in storage, any place in Chicago, it would have been stripped in a day.
Sure. And tagged and everything else.
Yeah, or heavily graffitied and you name it. So Mr. McDonald from the corporate level calls the vice president and general managers at EMD. He says, hey, we're going to bring that steam engine and you're going to keep it in your factory there because it's closed to the public. Nobody can get it and can't, protect it. It's, well, sure, fine, no problem. So sure enough, it comes in to Congress Park on the former Burlington East End, 3-track main line. Rail fans call it the racetrack, but not. It's the East End. Anyway, and they back down the interchange onto the IHB and then back right down past the park and into the back gate at Electromotive and back right up to the engineering building.
Now, when it was coming from the West Coast to Chicago, was he pulling passenger equipment or freight cars or just by itself?
Just by itself. The crew car, and I think they may have had a couple of cars for braking and a BN green caboose on the back, which they dropped at Congress Park. So all it did, no auxiliary tender back in those days or anything, so all it was the red, white, and blue GS4 and the crew car, 76. So it backed right into the plant. And it's funny because back in those days, there was a sign on the scale house still there from when they built the factory in 1935 that no steam locomotives past this point. So
but it went past that point.
Yeah. And I mean, back in the 34, 35, when they built the factory and EMD was shipping stuff, there were no diesels that serviced the plant. It was all steam, IHB, Belt Railway, Chicago, stuff like that, B&O CT. And that sign was still there. I remember seeing it. To this day, I don't know who ever got the sign. But 4449 was the first live steam locomotive that ever got past the scale house out in the yard and backed right up to the engineering annex building.
So you got involved with that engine. Now, were you an engineer on that engine, or did you fire it, or both, or what was your involvement, and how long did that last? For a couple of years, or tell us about that.
Well, it started out, the general manager, was there, to greet, and the chief mechanical officer was Doyle McCormick. And once the pleasantries were all taken care of, I introduced myself. I said, I'm Jack Wheelihan of the service department. I'm assigned to the liaison, anything you need. And this is Ken Mosley. He's the superintendent of the engineering test building. Anything you need. Well, they'd hit a dump truck out in Utah someplace or other, so there was a wrinkle in the skirt on the fireman's side. And Doyle pointed to that, and he says, yeah, we're going to have to take care of that. We need a new piece of sheet metal. And Ken immediately, gets this general foreman, this guy here, and take care of this, and we'll get him a new piece of steel, and we'll have it painted in the paint shop and everything else. So Doyle turns and says, oh, Andy, okay, go with this guy. They're going to give you a new skirt. And then I said, okay, what else you need? He says, well, we're going to have to do a quarterly inspection. And Ken drew a blank. I said, well, Ken, what he needs, he's going to have to separate the engine from the tender and test the drawbars. They're going to have steel horses, and he's got to do a boiler wash. So they're going to have to drain all the water out. So he's got to have access to the fire hydrant on the other side of the track. And as I'm explaining all this to Mr. Mosier, I realized that McCormick is looking at me, looking at me, and he doesn't say a word. And I'm explaining everything that's involved with a quarterly inspection for a steam engine by federal law. Ken says, oh, okay, we can take care of that. So he goes off and he gets another couple of guys. McCormick, in his inimitable fashion, grabs me by the shoulder and says, how the hell does a guy in a diesel factory know so much about a steam locomotive?
That's good.
And I said, long story short, we'll get together. And from that day on, as things progressed, whenever they needed something, McCormick would call me from wherever they were in the country. And that's where we came up with the idea for the diesel MU control box to go in the cab. Because Doyle had seen the guys sitting at the picnic table inside the building controlling a locomotive that was outside on self-load test with just a box with a rotary switch with 8 throttle positions. And, they're in there reading the paper and eating lunch or whatever, and all the noise is going on outside. He says, we've had trouble with these diesels that the railroads put behind us, especially on the Missouri Pacific. They wanted their locomotives, because they had these 2 GP9s or something or other painted in bicentennial colors, and they keep wanting to run the train. Well, they're behind the steam engine. He said, I finally had to stop and go back. Yeah, they know the speed limit here is 40 miles an hour, but the track was so rough, I'm doing 20. And I finally stopped and went back and told them, I said, look, we got to have a come to Jesus meeting here, We can't go that fast on this kind of track with all those artifacts back there in that train. So I'm running it, and if I need help, I'll let you know. So there's got to be some way that we can control the diesels behind us from the cab of the steam engine. I said, sure, we can do that. Freight all this stuff up over in the parts building and ship it to where Doyle told us to, someplace down in Oklahoma or Texas. And when they had a week display where they were going to do a boiler wash on the engine, they installed all this stuff in the cab. The Freedom Train ended in Miami on December 31st. Amtrak wanted to run a transcontinental steam excursion. And clearer heads prevailed that, no, you don't want to go cross country in the United States in January and February to Portland, Oregon. Right. It's one thing going across the desert, but not when you get to the mountains. So they put the engine in storage in Birmingham and made a deal with the Southern Railroad that if they would store it for nothing, the weekend before we depart to head west, we'll run 2 excursions from Birmingham to Chattanooga and back on Saturday and Sunday. And then the following Tuesday or Wednesday, we pick up the Amtrak cars and head for Jackson, Tennessee, and south to New Orleans. So I went on that trip, went all the way from Birmingham to Portland, Oregon, and pretty much been part of the 4449 crew since 1976 or whatever. And I think the last trip I made with them, did an excursion from Portland to Bend, overnight stay, when that was 2017, I think, 2018. Changes in Amtrak policies why we can't do any mainline trips anymore.
Right. And then you also got involved with the UP Steam program. Steve contacted you, and you worked there for quite a while.
Yes. I know Steve Lee on a professional basis from EMD. I had people out there on UP for various locomotive deliveries in the late 80s and early 90s, some of the guys that worked for me. And, one thing led to another. And I even made a trip out there, and Steve gave me a $50 tour and everything of Sherman Hill, and went through the gates and everything, So we conversed on a business basis quite a bit. And, of course, for the 1991 California State Railroad Museum 10th anniversary, we were all together, the Daylight crew and the UP Steam crew there in Sacramento in 1991. And I think probably 1992 or maybe 1993, Steve called me up one day and he says, we're all getting older at this. And sometimes we have to go out and make these long trips. We're out for 10 days, 2 weeks. Some of the days get pretty long. And it's me that does all the running, and I got 2 firemen, Lynn Nystrom and Bob Krieger. But we're getting along in the tooth to put these kind of hours in, aside from the hours of service. We never violate that, but, there's not a lot of people that you can call on short notice that know how to fire these big oil burners. So would you be willing to come out as a second fireman on a contractor basis? We'll pay for your expenses. You fire for Krieger, Lynn will fire for me, and we'll split each day in half. Yeah, sure, I can do that. So I spent about 17 years in that capacity, working for Steve on the UP Steam crew, between 844 and 3985. I must admit that before 3985 was redrafted in the late 90s, boy, she was a bear to fire. I'd heard that from a lot of the old timers on the UP, that the 3900s were difficult to fire as oil burners. It was a piece of cake as a coal burner. And I did one out there when one excursion they did, and they did let me fire it a little bit on Sherman Hill, and they were right. But you had to keep on top of your game all the time. And if you got behind and it had, heavy train with you, boy, it was a bear. The only other locomotive steam engine I ever worked on that was more difficult to fire was the number 12 on the Kentucky and Tennessee Railroad, which we know today is the Southern Railway 4501. It was a big Mikado. It was hand-fired, and they weren't burning the type of coal that they were shipping to customers. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, that was a man-killer. I spent about 17 years as a contractor, fireman with Steve Lee's team, and last trip I made with them was 2010. We went to Portland, Oregon, and back to the 100th anniversary of the Roundup here at Pendleton Roundup.
Right.
And Steve told me he was going to retire at the end of 2010. So I said, that's same for me,
Yep, and that was it. Well, Jack, this has been an amazing hour. Thank you for all the great stories and all your service in the steam industry. You're a great guy. I got to know you on a number of trips with the UP Steam crew, and lots of great memories. And again, thank you for being with us today on the train station. We appreciate your time and your efforts, sir.
My pleasure. A lot of fun.
All right.
Thank you. All right. This is the train station on TNCRadio.live. Thanks again to Jack Wheelihan, our guest this week. Be sure to tune in next week for another great show here on TNCRadio.live. I'm Bill Waldrop along with Jim Leaders, and have a great week.
It's Landline Now, followed by Steve Summers' Overnight Drive every night on TNCRadio.live starting at 11 p.m. Eastern and 10 p.m. Central.